I'm going to start the recording, and I'm going to start with the recap, okay, for those of you that are kind of like coming for the first time. And I'm also going to make sure that we reduce the images, so no one is seen. All right, so some weeks ago, we actually started the topic of exploring how, as community members, we currently coach the innovations that we support or that we facilitate within our organizations. And we started kind of like the debate around this topic, okay? And in order to structure it as a community, what we did in the first session was to explore, well, what are some basic definitions of innovation and coaching that we could start talking about? And we actually discussed it as a community, given the experience and background that everyone had. And from that, we started to kind of like envision or imagine how would a process to coach the innovation work, okay? Like how would that look like? Yes. So that meant that we basically touch upon some keywords, some definitions, and some elements associated to innovation. We also did the same with coaching, and we even like went more specialized into how the agile coaching part looks like. And with that part, we did kind of our community exercise, right? Which allows us to get as community members a preliminary definition of what was for us innovation and coaching and how could that process look like. So that was the first session. The second session, we actually started to go more in depth into what are the different frameworks that could allow us to approach innovation as we facilitated within the organizations that we work with. And in order to do that, we basically kind of like first share with each other the frameworks that we knew as community members. And then we started to dive into different frameworks. We saw Disruptive Innovation by Clayton Kirstensen, as well as the latest modifications that it has, that framework, going from, for example, sustaining low-end disruption, new market innovation, to growth innovation, sustaining innovation, and efficiency innovation. So we saw the shifts and the changes in the framework too. We had a chance to see the Architectural Innovation Framework by Rebecca M. Henderson and Kim B. Clark, and how some of the community members actually use it. We also had a chance to run through the innovation portfolio by Bansi, Nagy, and Geoff Tough. And also some team members share how they use it in their organization and the advantages and disadvantages that they saw on this. Moreover, we went about the 10 types of innovation by Dublin and how it can be used in different contexts. We explore a little bit about open innovation by Henry Chesworth, and we even discuss some of the challenges that clearly are depicted in open innovation when bringing to market the innovations, and how this is one of kind of like the biggest challenges that we face. Finally, we also saw the Breakthrough and Reverse Innovation Framework by Vijay Govindaran, okay, and what it implies for today strategy approach to innovation. So that's kind of like what we had a chance to go through. Once again, and in this session, we had a second iteration to how for the community members, their innovation process would look like. And we did see some changes. We started to see how, given the frameworks that we review, some of them introduce new things in the impact, in the process, in the outcome, as well as the initial things to contemplate, okay? Now, today's journey is actually one of the most exciting because we're gonna talk about execution. And what I brought you today is actually a pool of options. And this pool of options, it's for you to think according to that type of innovation that you're facilitating within your organization. what is it that could help you move it forward, right? Let us remember that innovation are always embedded in a context and in a dynamic that we need to be aware of to make sure that we do something to push it forward and out of the market, okay? So that's what we're going to focus today. Also, just to let you know, in August, we're going to kick off the Agile Accelerator. It's something very interesting. It was born out of out of some of the needs that the community expressed. So if some of you are interested in that, that's already posted in the Agile Meetup. And there's a bit of a preliminary specification, more information about it, and a video that will go more in depth on what we're going to do. And some of the speakers that we're going to have in it too will be available in the upcoming 2 weeks. Okay, so just to let you know, watch that Agile Meetup. It's having some cool things. All right, let's get to the execution. So may I ask you, so how do you go about when executing that coaching of the innovations that you have had in the organizations that you supported, or within, you know, those things, those initiatives that you have led yourself? Anyone wants to kind of like share before we kick off? There's a silence. Are we a bit shy today?
No, just like having much to say. Probably we are still on the early stage.
Okay, early stage. So Krish, let me ask you something. When you have had the chance to, you know, put together something that you thought, you know, this is for me something, you know, new, innovative that can help a little the organization or can make a big change. I don't know what type of innovation have you led. How do you go about it?
Actually, I can give an example. For example, like I work in like car production factories and like in automation plants. And still people using papers to, you know, to do the checklist and, you know, to check all the machines, everything. So, and someone need to, like people like, you know, like some project engineers or project managers, they go and collect the papers and they come back and they feed in their information into the computer. So it's kind of, you know, it's a long process and they want to be in that way. And I want to change that. So what I did is I used the Microsoft product, you know, to bring some apps, ask them to fill it using the forms. It was really good. And what I have found out is there's a difference between the age group. So people below age 35, they are happy to use that. But above that, they are like quite, they said, no, it's not for me. I don't want to take my phone out. It's better with paper. So that's where, you know, everything starts. Like, I don't know. I stopped from there. I tried to convince people, but again, it's beyond my limits to push. So yeah, I would be helpful if there's any advice for that.
I actually love your example because it shows us that actually we all can innovate, right? Especially if we kind of are open to see what are some opportunities to make some changes. And once again, innovations have different types and we run through them. There are innovations that represent an incremental improvement, right? So going from a paper to something that it's digital, that it's in a program and that makes the process easier, that's a change, right? That brings with it some efficiencies, right? So that itself, it's an innovation, right? So thank you so much actually for sharing your example. Anyone else actually wants to share another example of an innovation that you have thought about and put together? Thank you, Krish, by the way.
No problem.
All right. While you guys think actually of your example, I want you to listen to someone. So we're going to listen to someone that his name is Scott Anthony. He used to be managing director for Innosight Spencer. And he's going to talk a little bit about innovation, okay? How everyone can do it. And with this, we're going to kick off the part of the execution, because this execution or the implementation of innovation is about doing it, right? But the first step to actually do it is to believe that you can do it. Yes. So let's listen a little bit about him. Let me know if you can listen to him now.
When I'm with groups, one of the questions I will always ask them is, give me an example of innovation in action. I usually get a very small number of things as answers to this question. People will talk about Uber or ride-hailing solutions. They'll talk about their iPhone. This perpetuates one of the biggest myths about innovation, that innovation is the job of a very narrow set of people. Entrepreneurs coming up with breakthrough concepts, people who are wearing white lab coats that are working in R&D labs. This is something that a lot of people perceive, that innovation is the job of the few. Let me tell you a very different type of innovation story, one involving an 11-year-old girl. The girl in question is my niece, Maya Hunter. She had a problem. Every night she liked to go to sleep with the dog on her bed and the door closed. Every night at about 11 o'clock, the dog would go to the door and start to whine. Not enough to fully wake Maya up, but enough to wake my sister up. She would come down the hall, open the door, and let the dog out. My sister gave Maya an ultimatum. Either you figure out a way to get the dog out of your room, or no more dogs sleeping on your bed. Maya innovated. Every night now when she goes to sleep, she closes the door and runs a string between the doorknob and the wall. When the dog starts to whine, Maya pulls on the string. The door opens. The dog leaves the room. Maya lets go of the string. The door closes. The problem is solved. This is innovation in action. We define innovation using 5 simple words. Something different that creates value. Something is intentionally vague. When I share the story of Maya and I ask groups again, tell me an example of innovation in action, I hear all sorts of different responses. Oh, I recently tried stand-up meetings, people will say. Or I've begun to use messaging apps to communicate with clients in new ways. Or I've changed the way that I'm reporting in my team. Innovation isn't the job of the few, it's the responsibility of the many, because there are lots of different ways to innovate. So what are you
going to do that could be different? That's how he kind of ends it up. But yeah, so this kind of like goes along something that Chris was mentioning, right? So actually, sometimes we think of innovation as these big innovations that we see represented in the media, in the markets, or, yes, so all around us. But actually, innovation is something that we can implement and go about in our everyday, and we can do. So this is why today, actually, the first approach to innovation implementation is one that Harvard Business has in a very interesting tool that they have that is called Harvard Managed Mentor. And they have a specialized course that is called actually innovation implementation. Very easy, very digestible, quick to do, by the way, and something that actually it's executable in your everyday. It kind of like gives you a great framework to go about innovation in your everyday. Okay, so what's kind of like the implementation process that they propose? So the first one is what we call identifying innovation opportunities. Okay, so that's kind of like the first step within this framework. And when we talk about identifying innovation opportunities, that actually punctually means some things, okay? That means to first create what we call a wide net, okay? And what do we mean with this? When you see kind of like the fishermen going about they're fishing, they cast a net, right? And within that net, they might get lots of fishes, but then some of them are actually the ones that at the end will be the best to come to market to sell, right? What we mean with casting a net in this first step of identifying innovation opportunities is for you as leaders to take some time to kind of like observe around you in the processes that you're leading, that you're embed, in the people that you engage, in the market that you're passionate about and that you're supporting through your organization, in your products that you are created, or even in your teams or in the way that you work. Just observe taking some time to observe, and then to kind of like question, what if we could do this? What if we didn't do this? What if we add this? What if we change that? So kind of like the process of questioning too, exploring how others do that. Why do they do it that way? What other possibilities exist? And finally, the timing for you to do some networking, sit down and talk with others. How would they do something that's in your mind that you think that could be different, right? So in this first step of identifying innovation opportunities, what we mean is like, take some time for you to kind of like build a wide net. And to build that wide net is not something that is fussy, but is actually doing that, observing, questioning, exploring, and taking some time to network, to talk with others. How would they do it? Moreover, in this area of identifying innovation, is like, once that you have that net of ideas, thanks to your observation, to your questioning, to that experimentation, that networking, it's for you to try to think, what can I connect? What can I reconnect in a different way? So thinking about the dots, right? Thinking of those ideas as dots that you can play around, change the way that they are organized, and see, well, what else can come out of that, okay? And then kind of like the final two things that are very associated to you as a leader going about the identification of innovation, besides casting a net and thinking what to connect and what to reconnect. It's about trying to expand the options, right? So sometimes we have ideas that we really like, and they are tackling a problem. And actually, by redefining the problem, we are already expanding that the space of ideas that the problem can have. So if maybe before we had one idea associated to that problem, once we redefine it, it turns out that we can have 3, 4 associated to it, making our options expanding our options, okay? So we can like see new things. And the final thing that goes into identifying opportunities is always to ask yourself too, what are those things that are not obvious? Okay, so what is it that I'm seeing obvious, and what in this case could be something that isn't obvious and actually could be interesting. So as you see, all this area of identifying innovation, either by trying to create a net, okay, through the exercise, for example, of observation, networking, and the other things that we mentioned, as well as kind of like reconnecting, redefining the dots, but also kind of like expanding the ideas through redefining the problem and going beyond the obvious, is one fast way to go about in those innovation opportunities, okay, which can make opportunities very impactful in little things, okay, and in the big things too. Now, the second step in this implementation approach is for you to prioritize, okay? It's great that you casted that net and you got that huge amount of ideas, and that you play around connecting them and seeing in different ways, that you saw to which problems they could be, and even redefine those problems to even build more ideas under them. And then that you filter them by seeing, you know, what isn't obvious here that also could work. It is time within that universe for you as a leader that is coaching your innovation, or that you're executing your innovation, to actually start prioritizing. Okay, what is it here that I really want to do? And that involves, in this step, actually for you to kind of like fine tune, okay? And that means, well, given all this set of ideas that I have to solve these specific problems, okay, how can I redefine and scope better the problem with my team, and actually within those ideas explore which ones are high impact and low effort, and we can go about and execute them, or which ones are, you know, high impact but are high effort, are still relevant but we require that, and moreover which ones are low impact, low effort, or low impact, high effort. So let's try to have a space for you as a leader here to, once you have all that net of ideas associated to key problems that you have and you have reconnected and thought about them, to actually pick one set. So this is the problem that I most like with all these ideas that it has associated. Fine tune that problem, okay? Make sure that that you can scope it with your team, or that you can scope it by tapping into others that you network, that you ask about in the case that you are here the change agent and you're leading the initiative by yourself initially, okay? Do that, okay? Redefine, scope it better, and then do the exercise of thinking, yeah? What is high impact, low effort? What is high impact, high effort? And decide which of those are you interested on. The idea is for you as a leader to identify easy wins, the ideas that you should probably act on immediately, okay? That you usually say, well, why haven't we already done this, for example? That you also identify what we call incremental changes, which are those ideas that are easy to execute, but might not be worth kind of like the effort, right? These are the type of ideas that you ask, is it worth my time? Those are usually kind of like incremental changes. For you to also think, what are time wasters? And this is actually your biggest, one of the biggest challenges of to, yeah? Which one, Min? Can you guys hear me? Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, super. Okay, sorry, Jamek. I thought that you had a question. Okay, so because you guys can hop in. Do you have a question, Jamek, or is everything all right?
Yeah, all good with me.
Oh, good. What we call the Zoom, right? The typical Zoom microphone thing. Perfect. Don't worry. We are all suffering this sometimes. All right. So the other thing here is for you to kind of identify the time wasters. I was mentioning that that's kind of like one of the biggest challenges that you're going to face. Those are the ideas that would be probably a waste of your time or your resources at that point. And finally, what we call the ball moves, okay, which are ideas that might be difficult to implement in a sense that are high impact, high effort, but can provide very, very, very high benefits. So this prioritization of potential innovations is for you to kind of like think that, what are easy wins, what are incremental changes, what are time wasters, what are ball moves, and you can do this by exploring what requires effort and what has impact. The other thing that you usually do this in case that you're a leader that it's having, that it's kind of like in charge of a product, for example, yes, or that you're in charge of designing a new process, or that you're bringing to the organization a new business model. In here is when also kind of like the financial analysis might come to play. So here's where sometimes you do also kind of like the financial analysis of that type of innovation if this is what you're leading in that moment, okay? So the final 3 steps within this framework is what we call design innovation experiments, okay? And the experimentation part also doesn't have to be all fussy. Once again, it's about having clear what's going to be the hypothesis that you want to test. What is your core hypothesis? What are going to be kind of like the assumptions that you have to be aware of as you go about the innovation, and what are going to be the criteria that you and your team or you and your organization define as success. In the experimentation, there's many complementary techniques that sometimes you see people using, for example, design sprints, or they use the agile sprints too. And in their sprint planning, they simply, put about what's going to be tested and what's going to be the success criteria and what has to be done. And then they go to the review and to the retrospect to see what happened there. Okay, great. And then the final thing that I actually like about this framework is that it doesn't forget something that is called build support for innovation. So businesses or other organizations have people, okay? And we might need people to get across or to build an innovation, be it the different types that we discussed in the previous session all about this. We will need them, right? So how do you go about building that engagement strategy, okay? How do you go about identifying who are the decision makers, those that kind of like determine which innovation in the organization gets resources and which one doesn't, and also may decide which are the ideas that can be pursued or cannot, for example. Being aware of who are your partners, those that help you put the idea into action, okay? Help you implement it. Be aware of who are your champions, those that might be very useful is to spread the word, to share kind of like the enthusiasm about it and get it widely noticed within the market that you're trying to target, your customers or your organization, if it's something that is internal. And finally, who are the users? Yeah, so who are ultimately those people that you are creating this innovation for, will be affected by it. And you really need to know their voice constantly to adapt that innovation and make it more fit to them. Yeah. And the last step is kind of like learn from success and failures, right? So this is a very quick 5 steps kind of like implementation approach that is useful, especially for what we call innovators within kind of like organizations, or product innovators or process innovators, that they're kind of like working within organizations trying to get this. And even if you are an innovator bringing something to market, you will need maybe to build, partners to get it across. So it's important to know, well, who are going to be my partners, who are going to help me position it in the public agenda, who are going to be the users of those, and across the organizations, who are going to be the decision makers that I need to engage with. Okay. Now, that's one approach. But the thing gets more interesting, right? Because there's a lot about how do we get across innovation. So what you see here is what we call the double diamond design process. It was created by the British Design Council. And this is kind of like a framework to go through the creative process, like from creating an innovation to kind of like put it in the market. It is very used by UX and UI designers and within IT projects, and more than happy to put kind of like some links so you can go about it later. As you can see, you have the double diamond. So you have the whole process of diverging and converging. You go from not knowing what it could be to actually put it out in the market, something that it is. And it combines an approach to kind of like make sure that as you define the innovation, you do the right thing, and then you're doing it in the kind of like the right way. Okay. So it has different steps that proposes for you. For example, kind of like ripping the brief by actually focusing more on the question, on the challenge, and how the client understands it, and researching about that. Conducting that primary and secondary research to refine even more. Kind of like trying to build themes and clusters, find kind of like what are those opportunity areas that you can go about, and what could be some preliminary personas or customers that are defined. And then out of that, you start the process of ideating, okay, evaluating those ideas, and testing out those ideas, those hypotheses. Yeah. So that will give you some answer about the product solution. So then you can go to market more sure that that prototype that you test, you already learned something about it, okay? And you have built and made some changes to it. So that release that you have had is something more strong, yeah? So this model is kind of like a revamp model because as you see, it kind of like has had now this experimentation phase very strengthened, and then has put all the work that comes before to make sure that you do the things right. So sometimes when we're asking, so how we could go about the coaching of this innovation, this is another process that, this is another implementation approach that you can think of. Now, besides this one, you have something also that is by the Design Thinkers Academy. And they actually came up with this idea for the agile development of products. And I really loved it. So I thought it would be great also to add it to your closet of frameworks that we are having across all the sessions. Basically, as you see, it uses design thinking. It uses also lean startups, and it uses the agile approach. Okay, so it kind of like mixes the three things. So one, to figure out the right thing, and then kind of like doing it the right way. Yes, one that it's lean in the cost, but also that strengthens kind of like the adaptability. Yeah. So this one goes through the following steps. So you will have your team basically going through empathizing, which is the phase in which you kind of like learn more about your customer, their persona, their needs, their jobs to be done, their pains, their gain. This is the phase in which you learn all about your customer, right? And then after that, you go and you kind of like defined what within that is it that you want to focus and solve as a problem, right? Then you start ideating the best way to actually solve that problem. And you put together kind of a prototype that matches the following, complies with the following criteria, right? It's kind of like desirable, meaning that it complies with what your customers needs, jobs to be done, or kind of like gain, pains were, okay? It is feasible. You can do it in the time because we always have time limitations. We have budget limitations. We have business strategy context. We have competitors, right? So yeah, so it is kind of like feasible, yes. And then it's viable. It's something that is going to be sustainable in time, and that you can really make it. And as you see, then you start kind of like the testing of it and the refinement of it as from a prototype to an MVP. And throughout that process that you are running the experiment, what you're actually is measuring every time, what are the changes that you have to do and how you have to do it, learning very fast. And with that learning, then you decide what goes to final kind of like proof of value, yeah, and goes definitely to market that we want to ship as a product. And that's where the agile methodology comes across, because then you start, your sprint plannings, your sprint planning, in which you decide what's going to be done in that sprint or in the upcoming sprints, and then you start kind of like reviewing, retrospecting as you ship that product increment. Right. So something very interesting here is as you see, they're using design thinking to focus on the problem solution fit. They're using the lean startup to work on the product market fit. Yes, because you're having there the experimentation. And then they are using actually Scrum to scale up the market fit. So it is a super interesting approach, to be very, very honest with you guys. And I really loved it. So I wanted to bring it to you because sometimes, we're like, well, how do we go about the development of this specific problem, of this specific product? And if you have teams that are already agile teams and are knowledgeable of the lean methodologies, this would be super cool Yes, and also the design thinking. Bear in mind that for this implementation, it is ideal if you have team that have had some exposure or some capabilities in this area. If not, and you wanted to try this out, you would have to work on the development of this. Yes. And this is why I'm also bringing you different implementation approaches. Now, you have what we call the design thinking approach per se, which is, as I mentioned before, as you're developing the innovation, and this can be something little, you know, like for example, just recently within my company, to be very honest, we had to create kind of like, we had to design a process to make better our innovation workshops, for example. This is a case. And I use the design thinking process just to develop something very fast. I asked different clients that we have, the different team members that have executed this, some experts that we have within the organization and the area. And this kind of like allow me to build different personas around this and what were the challenges, the pain points. And from those interviews, then I started to define the new lean way that we were going to do it and ideate it, and then just kind of like build a little prototype of it and then test it. So it is a process that actually helps you to really kind of like create things fast and easy. So as I mentioned, the first step, you got to go through empathize, make sure that whatever the innovation, whoever is going to be the users of the innovation and wherever the innovation is going to have an impact, that's very important because yes, sometimes the users are the ones that we have the biggest impact, but sometimes actually not the direct users of what we're creating are the most impacted by it. So do bear in mind when you do the empathize. You go through that phase of kind of like doing some interviews or shadowing or seeking information. You build kind of like the personas about it. You identify the pain points, which is the most important, and the gaps. From that, you define what is it, what is the problem, what are the gaps that you want to solve with your innovation idea. You scope it. Thanks to this, you can scope, which is what you actually do here in define. And then once you do that, you start ideating, okay? So you start saying, you know, how could I then solve this problem? And you can gather ideas from others too. And I would recommend this if you can, if you're short on time, well, but ideally you actually incorporate others' ideas. And this can help you then to start kind of like prototyping, which one is it that could work. You could do very easy things like storyboarding or little mock-ups to see if that works or not. And then you kind of can test it with those that are your main users or the people that are going to be impacted by it to see if they like it or not. Okay. So that's kind of like the design thinking. There is other processes that are more about making the implementation a little bit more, incremental and then iterative. Not iterative and incremental, but more like incremental and with a bit of iteration. So this is an example, right? So you would go through the discovery of that particular innovation or use case that you're trying to develop, then the definition, the selection of that idea that you're going to work on. And you do the same that we mentioned in the first case, the prioritization. And then that you kind of like develop it in the sprints that you decide to work with. And whatever you learn from that, from the deployment of those sprints, you kind of like review it and assess the learnings and impacts, okay? Finally, coming to the final kind of like execution approaches. This one is used by McKinsey. They call it the 8 essentials of innovation. And in here, I really do like that it considers the part of kind of like aspire, okay? Kind of like creating that aspiration for the innovation, then choosing, okay, what is it that you want to invest your time in and balance that time and risk according to the other initiatives that you would also be thinking of doing, okay? Discovering that idea that you're selecting to work on as an innovation, how does it differentiate you? How does it differentiate your team, your business, your product in the market, your technology? It's really thinking about the differentiation, right? So I do think this is very interesting. Later on, thinking about going about in the implementation, how you evolve it. So how from that you created, for example, in the case of Chris, how out of that now digital approach that he has created, he could even evolve it, right? To even make it even more easier. Now that he make it easier, even more easier, right? So how can evolve it? How could you accelerate it too? So it makes you think that. So that's very interesting, right? Because it's not like, oh yeah, I did the innovation and there we go. No, it's actually keep on, it pushes you to even kind of like innovate more, right? So because you will be evolving that innovation, you will be accelerating that innovation, but then you will be thinking also how to scale it, how to launch it. For example, this case of the Microsoft project that Krish was mentioning, how to do it not only in my team, but in other team, and then in the organization, and then in the other organizations that work with my organization, if it makes sense, of course. Yeah. But as you see, it is something that makes you think about as you go in your implementation. And then finally, it also asks you to think about how could you extend it? Yeah. So once you have done this innovation, how you could create and capitalize it to build external networks around it, right? And how could you mobilize and motivate people to actually engage with it? So it's very interesting, and it's very typical also of McKinsey because it brings a strategic approach, right? It's not only about the aspiration of an initiative, choosing it, discovering, and kind of like doing it, but also how could you accelerate, scale, extend, mobilize. So it has all of these strategic components as you go in the implementation. Yeah, asking those things it's different than the approaches that we saw before, right? This other approach is kind of like the same that I was mentioning. It follows the double diamond. And it basically says, as you execute the innovation, you work on in the better discovery of it, which is the better scope, the better understanding of the pains and gaps associated to that innovation. Then you define what is it that you want to kind of like work on, and then you develop a vision statement. This is kind of like the vision of the product, of the process, of the X or Y innovation that you're developing. You go and you develop that, and then you deliver it, right? So it's kind of like very focused. This is another approach to the implementation, and it says, look, all of these approaches are very linear, and actually when we have to execute something in the real world, and we talk about innovation, and this one comes kind of like from the theory is we have to first explore what are the opportunities, what are the challenges. From those, we generate ideas, and then we scope what is feasible, viable for us, and we also desire. So it has that component also that we saw in design thinking, and that we develop and we test. And when we do that, we explore the return on investment. Okay, what is the return on it? What's the return or benefits for my team if it's not something that's related to a product, business model that needs a financial quantification? You make the case, right? And if there is a positive case for it, then we continue with the delivery and implementation of it. We grow it and scale it, and we explore even if we want to take it to the systems that we work and engage with as a business or as an organization. Okay, so that's kind of like the approach that it has. And following a little bit that execution approach, you have this one, which is the same thing. You kind of like discover, you frame the opportunity. In different from the other ones, this one focuses more of kind of like incubating that idea. From then it's kind of like you can ideate further what changes you need to make. You evaluate then after those changes if it makes sense to put it in a prototype, And if it does, then you work on the delivery and scaling of it, okay? So it goes through a process of what they call plan, grow, and harvest. So that's kind of like the implementation of the innovation approach. And finally, and not least, you see also kind of like in public service that they have innovation processes too for the execution. And very interesting is that they put first everything that has to do with, well, you understand first the stakeholders' needs and pains and what they want to achieve, the context that they're in, okay? And that's kind of like the first step. And there's many things there to do, for example, and they share different actions for you to take. Then you experiment with diverse ideas, and the one that best perform is the one that you implement and explore the impact that it has, okay? Which is usually there where you create the prototype, you conduct the trials, and you kind of like make changes for your key stakeholders of your innovation. Okay, that implies at operational level that you define the challenge and the goal, you gather insights and reframe the challenges with the learnings that you have had. You kind of like experiment and get the clarity on what is the hypothesis, the assumption, the desired outcomes. You gather the data and what happened on that. And with what you obtain, you go and you implement a prototype, okay? So that's kind of like the process there, yeah? In all of the methodologies, you will see though an emphasis on doing things that are desirable for those that you want to positively affect with your innovation, making sure that it's viable, okay? And third, making sure that it's feasible, all right? So we have seen kind of like different approaches to the execution. And the idea is for you to have them in what we call your framework closet. So you can pick what you like, or you can shape things as you like. You actually have them right here, okay? So any comments here? Any thoughts?
Really like what was on slide 25, which was how those three frameworks come together, which is on design thinking, lean startup, as well as agile. Never saw that in those ways, so it was really good.
Yeah, right. So, actually, Jamek, just to let you know, also, I discovered this like 2 months and a half ago, and I really liked it too. I do feel like you the same. For me, it was just it made me happy to see how things could come together. I feel like this is what I found more useful.
Yeah. And we were always trying to accept one framework or the other, but I think the value would be at the cusp of 2 or 3 frameworks. Like this is a cusp of 3 frameworks. So I think at least in my gut feeling, I'm getting that it may work for a lot of things.
Yeah, and the interesting thing too, right, is like to also understand like what like each process framework can be used for, in a sense, like one of them, like for example, design thinking is pretty good at really helping you do the right thing, right? Because it connects you directly there with the user and it builds from the user everything, right? But then in the case of Agile, it helps you to do it with the rhythm, with a pace, to really make it clear for the team, yes, for them to review, like, you know, so it gives that, let's do the thing right. But sometimes it's not enough with doing things right if you're not doing the right thing. So this part here, design thinking and lean startups, all about like doing the right thing the right way. So I really love that approach.
Yep.
Yeah, I supported that as well. Quite innovative way of integrating all aspects to get the best out of it. It's an hybrid approach, but there's no one way to do things. So very, very good too.
Yeah. The only thing that I feel here that it's still missing is the stakeholder management, you know, kind of like to make it more explicit. I mean, in Agile, it's still, you know, you have the product owner who's managing a lot of the stakeholder, right? So you have a lot of their stakeholder managers. So it might be there. That is something though that I did enjoy about the other executions, that it makes it even more explicit, right? That because it is, I'm sorry to say, it might be a pain sometimes, that area.
Yeah, I rightly support what you were saying. With the diagram is good. I would just add something, maybe an arrow, and just put continuous stakeholders management. Yeah. Because in all aspects, you have to engage your stakeholders. And because it's not for you alone, and everybody has to buy in. So all through the stage of empathizing, defining or idealization or prototype, you have to engage one part or the other, if not all, stakeholder along the journey. So I think just having an arrow from the beginning to the end and indicating continuous stakeholder engagement. That will be my input to what you said, which is valid.
Yeah, totally agree. Any other thoughts or comments? By the way, I'm going to stop here the part of the recording for the team members that were not able to come. Okay, stopping.